Welcome, everyone, to this month's edition of the Earthkeepers Meetup. This is a program of Arash Canada, and we are offering discussion and interviews with people to help us care for creation at our church. So we're wanting to equip each other to mobilize those in our congregation, others in our congregation to care for creation. And today we have a special guest that I'm delighted to welcome. So let me add. Today we have Jasmine Kwong. So Jasmine and we've been acquainted for a number of years now, and one of the things I'm interested in, we'll get into this maybe a little bit, is you started your creation care kind of journey in food. At least that is a big part of it. And then you're also really interested in marine conservation, though you are currently involved with OMF and Lausanne and okay, we're gonna have to get into this about who, what these things are and how they intersect for you. But maybe to start, you are not in Canada today. So where are you coming from? Where are you today?
Okay, so hi, thanks so much for inviting me, Rick. I am calling in today from the Philippines. I'm based
Okay.
in Metro Manila.
And if I had the luxury of being with you today, and we said, hey, let's go for a walk in some sort of, green space, what would we find? Just give me a little snippet of what we would find if we went outside your door.
Very close to where I'm staying, there are some fruit trees, one of which is a
Okay.
favorite of mine called the catalyze or cotton candy berry. So
Oh,
it's a favorite of some of the pigeons here, as well as children or adults
okay.
if they
Okay.
can get.
Is it sweet or what is it like?
It's actually quite light flavor. It's got a pop, just like what a cherry would have, but a lot
Oh,
smaller than the ones that you would see in Canada.
oh,
Yeah.
wow. I love fruit and particularly berries, so you've got my attention, that's for sure. Okay, that would be really cool. Okay, so you are in the Philippines, um, and as I mentioned briefly, you have a role with OMF and also with Lausanne. Um, but oh, hang on a sec. I'm going to back up a little bit. Actually, my first question I want to ask is, you have a role with these organizations that has to do with caring for creation, but how did caring for creation become something that you're interested in or that you work professionally in? Where did that start for you?
Yeah, ever since I was young, I've had a fascination for both people and the natural world. I grew up appreciating different cultures and even dreamed of becoming a marine biologist, even though I grew up around the Great Lakes and not close to an ocean. But for
Okay.
some reason, the marine world always fascinated me. And I think the strong sense of curiosity and wonder that I had as a child meant that I spent a lot of time outside, a lot of time talking and getting to know people and cultures. So much so that I ended up studying conservation biology and later community development with a focus on food issues. So these
Okay.
interests have carried on with me into adulthood. But
Okay.
I think interestingly, I didn't connect these passions and with a focus on people and nature too much with my Christian faith, even though I
Mm.
grew up in my Christian faith since I was young. It was actually the time that I lived in Vancouver, BC, that I started to make more of those connections between Creator, God, um, His human and non human creation, and then my own passions. So
Huh.
now I see them as totally intertwined.
Okay.
I find my faith, vocation, and understanding of God and God's desire for creation as very interconnected. I can't unsee that anymore.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a couple of things that I want to tease out and pick away. Once briefly, okay, you're in the Philippines. If you're interested in marine stuff, like tell me some crazy creature you've seen while you've been there. I'm sure there must be something.
Well, it's incredible being here in the Philippines because this is in the middle of the Coral Triangle, which means it's one of the most marine biodiverse spots in the world. So it's
Yeah.
such a joy and privilege to be here. Yes, on occasion when I have the chance, I try to enjoy some time diving underwater. One of my favorite creatures is actually frogfish. There's many species of them,
Okay.
but they're just one of the funniest because they're kind of strange looking. They don't move, like how you would see other fish move, and they
Okay.
often anchor themselves in between coral or rocks, and they can camouflage. And then they're a
Okay.
type of angler fish, so they have a dangling lure,
Yeah.
which you know in front of their face, and then they just wait for unsuspecting prey. Yeah, it's a pretty fun thing to encounter a creature that you've just had fascination with, just seeing on TV or reading in a book, but to actually swim up beside one is pretty phenomenal.
Wow, that sounds really cool. The best I've ever had like that, I think a couple times when I've been snorkeling, I bumped into a little octopus and it was just,
Oh,
oh wow,
yeah.
that's really neat. I mean, lots of fish, of course, which are beautiful and colorful, but ooh, that's different. What you're
Yeah.
describing is like, ooh, yeah, that'd be quite something. That's so cool. I also wanted to ask about so if you were interested in these things, from way back, and you also simultaneously had this faith, but it was only later that they came together, or you saw the connection between them. My guess is that might be like some of that story might be true of many people that care about creatures, planet, food, some element of creation, and they care about Jesus, but they just don't really see how they're connected or they haven't really thought about that before. So my question is like, what helped those come to get together for you, or who helped you connect
Mm,
those, or what facilitated that? Because like as I work in churches, like that's what I want to do. Like I want to facilitate that. So what was it for you?
yeah. I mean, definitely for me, it was a gradual process because my interest, as I mentioned, started from when I was young. And I think when I was younger, I associated that a lot with just my own exploration. Like my parents supported me getting into what I became interested in and allowed me to study what I did. So it just got cultivated, and I focused it, I guess, on myself. Like these are my passions, these are my interests about the world and how I want to make a contribution as part of this planet. But I didn't, interestingly though, as a Christian at that time, I sort of saw those as parallel journeys.
Hmm.
And I think definitely part of what helped the intersection, um, for me to actually see the intersections, was meeting others that were like-minded and like-hearted. So
Hmm.
I met people who were very passionate about food issues, very passionate about marine issues, um, in my previous workplaces and whatnot. But I think in meeting Christians who also cared about these issues, that really helped. Not necessarily the
Mm,
exact same areas of focus, but when I realized how integrated and how integral these issues are and how they were living it out, how they were wrestling through questions, I think it was very much just opening my mind to a different way of seeing things that were already in front of me, already part of what I cared about and what I did.
mm,
Um, so seeing it modeled, but at the same time meeting people who get it. Yeah,
right.
I had often found beforehand, when I was in those areas of working in food issues, for example, where at that time I didn't meet many Christians in that space. So I did actually wonder a number of times, yeah, where is the Christian faith connection to this? Because I feel so strongly that it's actually part of my Christian conviction, but I didn't actually have the words and know-hows
Mm,
to take that intersection
yeah.
deeper.
So what words would you use now? Like that was before, but that's the before. What's the now? So like take food then, like that's a huge topic. What we eat, how we eat it, how we use it to, extend hospitality to others, but then there's food systems, how we grow it, how we dispose of it, like how it's traded and, the implications on people and ecosystems is a huge topic. Um, but how, how would you describe it now? How is food part of your faith and maybe touch on like how is that part of the care of God's world?
I think for myself, when I was working in food issues, I often looked at it from food systems perspectives and looked
Mm,
at the social, economic, political issues around food, food security related issues, food sovereignty. I think at that time it was sort of looking at the multidisciplinary approach to how we understand food and
yeah.
how we're all affected by it. This conversation around there's more than enough food to feed the world so many times over, but yet there's still people who are starving. So
Right.
just even sometimes the justice related issues connected.
Hmm.
But when it came to linking the faith component, I think it was just making a connection that the spiritual life of myself as a Christian is
Yeah.
deeply intertwined with the physical world that I'm living in. It's
Mm,
not something abstract and something that I have to just say that, oh, Jesus in the Bible ate and drank with people, but that's just text, that's just a story. But no, he really sat down and ate
mm,
food like I'm eating when I
mm,
sit with my friends. And breaking bread with people, it's not just an expression. You literally do break bread. Um, when it can be with a stranger, it can be with people that you eat with very
mm,
often. So I think it was just putting a realness into something that sometimes was discussed more conceptually or just at the spiritual level when they're so much more deeply interconnected than that.
mm,
And it put relevance on both ends of the work that I had been doing, where the physical, economic, social, all those kinds of issues matter, but it also weaves in this spirituality,
mm,
and how we see things as connected to who put those things in place in the first place. That was God. So it for sort of fills out for me something much deeper. Even right now, focusing on this topic of creation care, I think of, wow, like the way that God designed humanity to survive is not just that we need food for calories, but actually, what is the food? The food is plants and animals, which is the rest of creation.
mm,
And in some of my conversations around creation issues, sometimes people limit that to just an environmental thing. It's just a nature thing. But we too are part of God's creation, and it's just been so special to think of God's design with something so deeply interconnected that His creation would be interdependent of one another. So,
mm,
like, we eat of plants and animals that keep us alive, and then when we die,
mm,
our bodies go back into the earth and are eaten by earthworms. So
mm,
we too provide food for other creatures. And I think
mm,
for me, that's a very beautiful piece that, God's design was that intentional, but that intricate and
mm.
interrelated. Yeah.
I'm totally tracking. I love it. I'm curious, can you think of a story that where you experienced a sort of, hey, these different threads, like the how is this part of faith? Wait a minute, how is this connected to food systems and like people that need food that don't necessarily have it? So the kind of justice side, and how is this maybe it's connected to, oh, it's also linked to biodiversity and how we grow it and like I'm curious if you have a story where either you experienced a bit of an aha moment when, oh, wait a minute, these things are all connected in a way that I didn't know before, where you've experienced that, or where you've been able to like facilitate that or been witness to when somebody else had that light bulb moment going on. Like now that you sort of, do you understand my question? Like now that you sort of have this, like I'm curious, like how do you facilitate that for other people, or where have you seen it happen for other people, where they start to get a glimpse of this interconnectedness?
I'll share with I'll start with sharing myself and my situation,
Mm,
and then a one that followed after. So, number of years ago, when I was living in Vancouver, I had the chance to take a food course by
mm,
Laura and Ruth Wilkinson,
mhm,
and I was on their property in Galiano Island
yeah,
together with other students. And the 2 weeks that we had together, we spent time really getting into scripture, talking about how God provides and food from the land, and many different issues around scripture and Jesus's life. But at the same time, we were on a farm, so we
mm,
spent time in the garden. We spent time in the kitchen cooking together. I think for me, one particular moment that I found a lot of those things coming together in a very powerful way was just sharing a special meal that was a bit like a Seder meal.
mm,
And a week before that, we had witnessed the slaughtering of a lamb.
mm,
And so the Seder meal was already a lamb that we had all taken turns to help remove the fleece off of, and at the same time air dried it, and one group was responsible for cooking that lamb. So we had that meal together,
mm,
and we had all the other side fixings as well. We had our drinks and whatnot, and we broke bread at the table, and had communion.
mm,
So I think for me, growing up, a practice like communion was, in the church sanctuary, very
mm,
solemn, and I mean, there's times and places that's a very appropriate posture to take. But in that particular moment where we were around the table, it was just a reminder like, this is literally the type of setup that Jesus was with
mhm,
with his disciples, where it was a table with food. on
Yeah.
it. So I think for me, I hadn't really focused on communion,
Mm,
in a meal space, but
mm,
also because we had been in the middle of this course where we'd been reflecting very deeply on food issues and how it's connected to God and the rest of creation. I found myself just, connected to all the ingredients that were on the table
mm,
as well, which mostly came from the land.
mm,
So it was just important to be reminded, like it didn't just appear at the table. We were part of the process of putting it together. And then at the same time, partaking of things and knowing where it came from and saying thank you.
mm,
Um, Thank you to God, for creating those things in the first place. And then thank you to all those plants and animals and all the conditions that were put together to allow it to be on the table and tasting so good.
right.
So I think it wasn't a profound big thing, but it was an eye-opening, aha, just by being in this space where you're like, wow, this is such a ordinary occasion of having a meal together with people,
Mm,
but this the symbolism around it was so much more powerful. And then
mm,
I take this going further. So now I live in the Philippines, and there's a farm that I sometimes go to about an hour and a half away from where I live in Metro Manila. And it's a beautiful farm that has been developed to provide a sense of retreat, sanctuary, and refuge for the urban poor who often are living in the concrete jungle and don't have an opportunity to see much green, let alone connect with God as, creator God of not just people who can create buildings, but also of the natural world. So it's situated at the foothills of the Sierra Madre. And one of the things that has been happening over the last few years is the opportunity to host a similar type of retreat inspired by the Wilkinsons, but basically a retreat just allowing people to focus a little bit more on something that they do often, which is eat, but to be more considerate of that. So we bring each other in conversation around a theme each time. And then at the same time, we spend time in the kitchen. And yeah, we are just quite intentional about each step. So we take a pause, we discuss, and of course we contextualize to Philippine context. So when we take communion together, we're opening up a coconut, drinking the coconut juice and eating the coconut flesh. Um, and we take that as our pause to think about
mm.
the life of Christ as well being offered to us. So that's been a very, very special way to see that both in the Canadian context, but also me living in the Philippines, being able to do that with locals here as well.
Excuse me. It is remarkable when something so ordinary, like you say, eating a meal. Excuse me. Those of us that are lucky enough to have access to food, maybe might do that 3 times a day.
Mm,
Very, very ordinary. And yet to get a glimpse of how this connects me to God, to other people, to my current place, to people and places throughout maybe back in history and also into the future to some extent. Like to have sort of a glimpse of that turns that ordinary experience um, into something quite extraordinary. Uh, And I can't help but wonder, like, that's probably intentional about what Jesus was doing when he instituted Eucharist. Like, this ordinary thing can remind us of the extraordinary world and kind of the way that the extraordinary things that the Spirit is on about every moment of every day, and we get to participate in that. So
Mm.
that sounds, I want to come to one of those meals, particularly the ones where you use coconut for
Mm-hmm.
Eucharist. Let's do that.
That's special.
Thank you so much for sharing. Uh, maybe to shift things a little bit. So you've got all this background, interest in things like anglerfish and I can't, what was the name of the candy cane? No, cotton candy
Oh,
berries.
arachidid?
The, the,
Yes. Cotton
you've
candy
got
berry.
cotton candy berries. You've got this background that is a kind of not only a background that makes you familiar with sort of the economics and the social implications of food systems, but also the ties to faith and the work of the Spirit in our lives. You've got all of that. And now you're working for what might be called a kind of traditional missions organization, OMF, Overseas Missionary
Overseas.
Fellowship, Overseas Missionary Fellowship. And then also you have a role with the Lausanne Movement, which is also a kind of consortium of Christians around the world that care about mission. So you have as I understand it, a role with both that is particular to creation care. Can you take a few minutes, both like say a little bit more that whatever people need to know to understand OMF and to understand what the Lausanne movement is? Like you might need to describe those a little bit more. And then add on to that, like, okay, so what is a creation care catalyst or a creation care advocate, which is how I understand your role to be in these? What does that look like?
Mm-hmm. So OMF International, it's a Christian mission agency with its roots in China. The focus has since expanded to East and Southeast Asia, and now even beyond, because the diaspora of Asian people are all over the world.
Hmm.
And the main mission of OMF is about sharing the good news of Jesus Christ in all its fullness to East Asia's peoples. So, good news in all its fullness would include integrating care for God's creation, which is both people and the natural world.
Hmm.
So, it's being able to say that creation is all over the Bible and in the good news, and creation care is our response to the good news as part of our worship of Creator God and living it out as we're called to be a follower of Jesus. So, for the past 7 years, I've been a creation care advocate in OMF, helping to bring awareness, discussion, and action on creation care as part of integral mission.
Hmm.
And then the Lausanne movement is a global movement that helps mobilize Christian leaders to collaborate for world, world evangelization.
Hmm.
And the movement includes both a focus on different geographical contexts, which they divide into 12 regions, and also a focus on different issue networks. which exists to help highlight areas for the global church to continue to integrate as part of our Christian witness and discipleship. So, one of those issue networks is creation care. And within this space, I'm one of three catalysts for creation care, along with Dave Bookless, who is part of OMF International based in the UK, and with Benita Simone Mendoza, who is part of Ruho Thai in Guatemala. And I've been in this role since 2022. And in this space, one of the main things that I've been doing is being part of a group called Mission Agencies in Creation Care, which is a sub network under this issue network, where we've been meeting with those involved with more traditional agencies who are committed to getting into creation care.
Hmm.
So I can say more about
Okay.
that later on.
Okay. So I've got a bit of the picture now. So you're kind of these are entities that exist and have been going on, and they have some sense of the mission. That's why they exist, and you're coming along to kind of advocate within them uh, that the care of creation should be a component of what they do or what they talk about or how they focus. Have I got that right? Okay.
Yes.
I'm I'm curious, a couple of questions immediately come to mind. One, like, is this unique to OMF and the Lausanne movement? Are there other organizations that are like that? And if so, can you describe that a little bit? And then a follow-up question will be like have to do with have they embraced this? Have you received resistance? Has it been like a new idea? Has it been, that kind of thing? But start with like, um, is this special for OMF and Lausanne, or are there other groups that are doing something similar?
I think when one sort of starts in spaces like this, where, we started by calling these like maybe traditional agencies, it may start to feel like, oh, is this even something that the others in the organization even
Right.
resonate with and
Yeah.
come behind. So I think in that perspective, it can start as somehow, oh, is this a common thing? And maybe I will be the one sort of trying to wave the flag to say,
Mhm.
don't forget about this topic. But actually, when you do look around, and I'm so grateful for that, I am thankful to know that there are several other groups that are on this journey as well. I think when I say that, I feel like the spectrum is quite wide. You have those who are connected to more traditional agencies where it's still getting traction, and there's some good roots that are put in place, but it has a long way to go.
Yeah.
Whereas there's also other organizations that have really integrated this in different ways, but could still grow in other aspects as well. So, um, for example, in the Mission Agencies and Creation Care Network that I was just referring to earlier, um, there are groups like there are representatives within OM, YWAM, SIM, Interserve, BMS, AIM, Team, and the list does go on. I'm so
That's a lot of
grateful that
acronyms.
there's a mix of us. Yes, these are all what you would consider more traditional mission
Okay.
agencies, and we're at different points of the journey within our
Right.
organizations, but all with the desire to see this deepening and being able to, think through like how do we integrate these things as part of our Christian faith and witness.
Yeah.
So it's been a good space to be present with one another, to hear the process and the progress, but to also strategize and to share resources and whatnot. And of course, like there's other agencies like, World Vision, Compassion, Tear Fund,
Mhm.
even Russia that are just so active in these spaces already. So sometimes there's also that opportunity for cross pollination. Like, how do we learn from how they've taken things to their leaders, for example? Or how do we explore a very specific avenue, like carbon offsetting our flights?
Right.
Um, yeah, so depending on what the issues are, we can sort of tap on each other's shoulders for different levels of support.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to know, like, I take it you probably, there's a couple of groups that you've had more experience with, but whether it's ones you have direct experience with or ones you've heard about, like, how has this process been? You said you've been with OMF in this role for 7 years. Um, do you find people receptive and willing and open? Do you find them quizzical and puzzled? Do you find them hostile and resistant? And, on one end of that spectrum, you can probably name names. On the other end, it might be you might be more reluctant to name names. But like I'm curious of what your how this message and how you have been received, and then also related when when it hasn't been like an easy embrace, like an kind of quick, oh yeah, yeah. How have you overcome that? What are some of the ways you have tried to engage people that you've found, okay, that has been helpful? Maybe it's having them for a meal, for instance, and introducing them that way. But I'm curious what you found useful in bridging where there has been a divide.
Yeah. I'm actually grateful that in my years so far, I have very rarely found myself encountering very direct resistance. I think, especially when, I'm trying to approach these issues as something that many of us already have a connection to. I often think about creation care as more about relationships. It's about cultivating our relationships with creator and creation. And as a Christian, I mean, that's one thing that we definitely talk about is what's our life like with Jesus. So if that's already one of the components, then certainly to broaden that a bit further is to say, what are some of the other relationships we're invited to care for
Mm.
or care or to relate with? And that would include human relationships as well as non-human relationships. So for myself, even though I haven't met very strong resistance, of course, I am sometimes met with a little bit of confusion as to how it fits with them. So some people have a particular focus in a particular context. Maybe they teach in a theological seminary. Others might be practitioners working with in the community with youth, and somehow, in their work with people or those very specific contexts, they sort of wonder, like, what does creation care really look like? And then I realize as well, sometimes our understanding of what creation care also differs. So
Right.
sometimes it's even needing to backtrack to say, oh, hold on here. I'm not actually not only talking about stewardship. I'm not
Mm.
only talking about environment and climate change and the climate crisis. I'm actually talking about whole relationships which do include our care for people, whoever we're invested in already. But
Right.
what about considering where these people live and how they live?
Mm,
Um, and if we're talking, and if we're operating out of these things through our faith, you know, with Christ at the center and part of our motivation, then sort of like, well, why would we do this if we love Jesus? You know, does this help our witness? Because if this is God's world, wouldn't we want to respond, you know, to share with people that we love God, and part of how we love Him is how we take care of the people and places around us.
mm,
So I think it's been an important piece for me to invite people in my own journey, because I've been actually trying to unpack some of these questions myself,
right.
and to wrestle through, yeah, what do I mean by creation care? Who is creation? And how can I dynamically relate with a creator God who's not intangible, but he placed me in a real world
Mm,
with real senses? I actually can taste, see, and smell and experience the whole world around me.
mm,
Um, I mean, he could have just made us like floating souls just going around
mm,
with no sense of experience, but
mm,
we have a very tangible, visceral
right.
invitation.
Yeah.
So
Hmm. What do you think are like it's heartening for me to hear, okay, there are AIM, African Inland Mission, YWAM, Youth with a Mission. I think you mentioned SIM. I forget what that acronym is for, but another mission, OMF, Overseas Missionary Fellowship, all these different one more that are starting to kind of uh, see the connection with how what they're already doing um, actually relates to, and it has another dimension, put it that way. It has another facet that is yet to be explored, and they care about the people, but those people rely on a place. So maybe we need to engage with their place as well. I'm curious what you see as opportunities going forward. What are things yet to be fleshed out or or explored, or kind of potential that is still latent that you would love to see uh, some or some organizations or some missions or ministries to kind of let's take let's take advantage of that. Let's see where that goes. Anything come to mind on that?
I think one of my pieces, I have to say, so much of where I feel the opportunities lie also begin in our internal posture. It's
Mm,
it's easy to jump often
mm,
to the external actions and what is it that we're going to do
mm,
for God
mm,
and how we're going to save the planet. But I
mhm,
find what's been striking for me, like thinking about this as a Christian, is just where is our mindset on these things and what is our motivation? What's the why? And in this case, it's sort of like, what's the who, or
mm,
who's the who?
mm,
Um, and I think when I've been challenged myself in my own journey with that, I think um, it means even going back to something that I may have done and been familiar with, which is reading the Bible.
mhm,
But what is it like to actually take a fresh lens and read the entire Bible, considering all of creation?
mm,
When I was younger, I often was taught and, myself just focused quite a bit of myself in the story, or humanity as the primary focus, and this is the pinnacle of why God made creation. But, when we really read about it, it's about God and his creation and his love for creation, his purposes for it, and who he is. It's about bringing out the glory of God. And I think it's been a refreshing thing for myself, even just to reread things that I seemingly was so familiar with, but it's like getting new eyes. And actually, this
mm,
reminds me when I was at the Global Creation Care Forum, we had one Bible reflection from Maria Ale Andrade,
mm,
um, who works with Cheer Funds, and she shared a reflection that just was so helpful. That was saying, the creation that we talk about today is the same as it has always been.
mm,
It's creation that was made by God, that He has spoken into being, that He loves and said is very good. And yet somehow we sometimes miss some of the who is creation and what was it made for.
mm,
So, that invitation to sort of reframe the way that we're looking at these things that we think that we've known for so long. So, for example, like I said before, sometimes people think creation is just simply nature. I mean, we could also say people are part of nature too, but if I was to separate people from that
mm,
part, creation also includes people.
mm,
And so it's actually about the dynamic relationships within creation and then all of creation relating with their creator. So, what if we were to read the Bible with, these fresh lenses,
mm,
new set of eyes, as
mhm,
Maria would say, which I think is part of it when our posture on the internal is sort of realizing like this is actually part of my journey, part of my Christian discipleship, then it's not something you just sort of figure out off on a checklist and then tell yourself, I've done a great job, I've done my work, um, I can move on now. But
mhm,
it's realizing it's connected to something very much ongoing, and it's a transformation that I'm in a process of still becoming.
mhm,
Um, And so caring for God's creation is part of working that out, which might evolve, which means sometimes I make choices that I don't always, um, I feel intention about some of my choices. Like I couldn't make perfect ones,
mm.
or just knowing that I'm wired in certain ways, so I'll care maybe more in one area over another, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it just brings to mind the language of discipleship, like follow me. Okay, so it's a journey. Or pilgrimage, another kind of classic Christian kind of not just image or symbol, but like practice of pilgrimage, like journeying. Okay, so you're saying this is a it's a journey, and you're also saying to some extent it's a journey for those that have eyes to see. Can I re-engage scripture? Can I re-engage it with new lenses, new eyes? Any any suggestions on how to like it's one thing to cultivate that in me. Okay, but how do I get other co-pilgrims to join me? Um, or how do I, yeah, is there anything that you found that's helpful to um, encourage others to take steps on that aspect of the discipleship journey?
I think one reason why I started with my own posture and my own experience is because it's so hard to talk about
Mm.
quote unquote convincing people when you
Mm.
don't understand it yourself.
Fair.
You've had to wrestle through it. You've had to understand why it's um, important because you've experienced it. So a couple of things that do come out from my own practice as well, which I feel can be part of how you can invite others in, is simply to say, um, pay attention,
Mm.
slow down and pay attention. I guess sometimes, like now, the pacing of life, I live in a very big city in the Philippines. It's very easy to let life go by, and you're so focused on your tasks. There's so much stimulation around you with noise and smells and everything like that.
Mm.
Um, but just to say, you know what, like I wouldn't have noticed my aratilis tree or the cotton candy berry if I wasn't sometimes standing right under it waiting for my ride, my
Mhm.
jeepney.
Mhm.
And so when I
Mm.
can look up once in a while instead of just looking to see when is that jeepney coming, I look up and I say, "Oh, look I'm under a canopy of berries."
Mhm.
So sometimes it really is just allowing yourself to notice and also get to know something specifically. So, for example, I mentioned before that one of the areas of creation I'm very drawn to is the marine world.
Mm.
But there's many people I'm surrounded by who love the bird avian world.
Mm. Right.
So that's not really my thing, but there's many, many species in the Philippines only found here and nowhere else. So I think by being around some of these people, I've gotten to know some of the names of some.
Right.
And when they've taught me how to distinguish, one specific bird call, I'll say, "Oh, I know that bird now." And
Mm.
it makes a deeper connection to the place that I'm living. It's
Yeah.
not just noise, but I
Mm.
can actually pick out that particular noise and
Mm.
understand it as a particular song to a particular
Mm.
creature that
Mm.
God has put in the Philippines. So I think that's one. And a second one I feel is just the invitation to notice what is a niche area of ours that gets us. What's
Mm.
some part that you just can't stop talking about and
Mm.
you would just get drawn to naturally? So
Mm.
I've already said, for me, marine and food, but
Mhm.
for others, it might be the forest, might be the
Mm.
rivers, it might be even a particular place, which is
Right.
both people and land. And so what is it, what's something there that just sort of draws you and
Right.
um, yeah, I think it's hard to operate out of something that people can't connect to. So we may as well start where we already have a connection both in heart, but also in belonging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, your depiction of getting to know the bird's name or the fish's name or whatever. I've sometimes thought it's kind of like when I walk into a forest or an ecosystem, what is my experience? Is it like coming home at the end of a long week and, I'm walking into the house and I open the door and oh wow, there is a whole bunch of people here that I have never met. Somehow my home has been invaded and I don't know any of these people, and all of a sudden I'm feeling like kind of alert and defensive, basically. Is it that? Or is it like the same sort of scenario where I come home and I open the door and surprise, it's like a birthday party for me with all my friends and family, and I know everybody there and they all know me, and it's quite a different experience. Like even in my imagination, as I try to put my head in there, very, very different. Like one is life, like the ultimate almost in life-giving or something, something very affirming. The other is very like distant and ooh, tense and so on. And the difference is I know them. That's the difference. So can I engage with a forest or a river or something and start to get to know them so that when I come to it, I'm like, oh, that's Sally. There's Frank. There's, but
Yeah.
there's the oak tree. There's the cotton candy tree. There's the and then it's less it's it's not so much a bunch of strangers, it's a bunch of friends. And that
Mm.
can I think that can dramatically change my experience of it. Yeah.
I often think of a phrase that Randy Woodley has talked about, also
Mm,
Richard Balcom, which is the community of creation.
right.
Yeah, I really find that language helps us to just
Mm,
be acknowledging our interconnectedness,
mm,
which, of course, in this case, like it's intentionally designed by God
mm,
to be a web of life.
right.
So as you say, it's a very different thing to actually be connected, to know that we are what happens to one affects the other. But as you say as well, to even know them by name just connects you much more deeply.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I have a friend who when she's a botanist, so she knows
Mm,
everything about plants. And when she goes to a new city, the first thing she's looked like when I go to a new city, like if I went to Manila, the first thing I would want is like I'd want a map, or at least I'd look on Google Maps to kind of orient myself. Like what's here? Where's the river? Okay, where's the subway going? Okay, that's just the way I think. Whereas my friend Julie, she goes to a new place and the first thing she does, she looks at the plants and she will immediately be able to tell, oh, that's a such and such a plant and that plant I can tell is not doing well. That means this is out of place. The soil therefore must be the weather patterns are probably I can see it's in this sort of sun aspect and that's how she orients herself to a place and how she gets to know the place is by what plants are there and what what's what plants thrive or what plants struggle in a particular place. I'm like, wow, that's a whole nother perspective on the world that um
mm,
yeah, it's amazing. Um Speaking of going to different places, you have, grew up in Canada, but are now in the Philippines, so you have a fair bit of like cross-cultural experience. When it comes to this, uh, the effort to try to not only for ourselves, but to draw others into the journey of incorporating the care of creation as part of our discipleship, as part of our worship of God, and so on. What have you noticed in the differences, the similarities and the differences across different cultures? Maybe those are like language groups or ethnic groups, or maybe like church cultures. That could be as well. Um,
mm.
any observations?
Yeah, I think when I think of the similarities, like say even between communities I've been part of in Canada and also in the Philippines, I feel that some of them go back to what I was saying earlier, can be about the mindset. So again, it's just a different sense of framing, like what's important, what's
Hmm.
considered important, and just being reminded about, just where's the root of what it is that we believe in, and Do we again consider like all of creation in our understanding of the Bible speaks of not just people, but the entirety of creation, where it was both created by God, redeemed and restored by God as well. So it's not about introducing something new, but reframing and expanding a narrow view that we might have somehow taken at some point. And looking at how, this same God, who is the beginning of the Bible, goes to the end and has always designed humanity, or Adam and Earth, Adama, to be deeply interconnected.
Mm.
But so I think I always think about, like, Romans 12, and sort of like the renewing of our minds is
Mm.
something just so important as part of our process of um, making that shift. And I feel like I've seen that as a gap in some ways, um, wherever I have been so far. But I think one of the differences in terms of being in the Philippines is just naming the geographic impact, like where I am geography wise, is very different than Canada.
Mm.
So, for example, this is an island country. It has one of the longest coastlines in the world. And there's a very high population here dependent on livelihood by the sea or the land.
Mm.
So climate issues are definitely very normal, in the sense where annual natural events like volcano eruptions, typhoons, earthquakes are common, but then they are exacerbated or compounded by human induced issues like mining or deforestation, which, I mean, they do happen in other places as well. But I feel the geography of how this country has formed, as well as just it's where it's situated, means that
Yeah.
the experience is much more felt,
Mm.
whether people are fully aware of all the issues or not.
Mm.
Everyday lives are going to be affected. Even for me here in Metro Manila, there's many urban poor living in precarious places, which might mean low-lying areas, which means if there's a big storm, if I'm in a high level ground, then I'm not really affected. You just close your windows and then you
Yeah.
just wait out the storm. But if you're a low-lying area, immediately your home gets flooded,
Yeah.
and you have to deal with cleaning out your home, not even sure if your home's going to stay intact. Um, or people who have to live on or beside a landfill,
Mm.
because this huge issue of trash is a problem. But I think something that I've been reminded of as well, it's easy to sort of look at one place and say, oh, those are those issues that you need to deal with. The problems come from you. Um, but actually, instead of pointing fingers and sort of doing the judging thing, realizing that it's an everybody issue. So, for
Mm.
example, trash, the Philippines is actually considered one of the largest plastic polluters of the ocean. But
Mm.
I feel like a statistic like that needs to be taken with a grain of salt, because Filipinos are not the only culprits of the trash that washes up on their shores.
Mm.
Actually, because of ocean currents and whatnot, the trash is also coming in from other nearby countries. But also, Canada has a role in this. A few years ago, they were notoriously in the news for having shipped over freights of trash, including soiled diapers, to the
Mm.
Philippines. So, we have this sort of mentality sometimes, like, either it's not my issue because the impact of it is being felt far away from me, or we would say, if the issue is out of sight and out of mind, then who cares? I just don't have to deal with it because if I don't see it, I don't have responsibility.
Yeah.
Um, when the reality is that these issues are also, a justice and ecological issue. And then as Christians, it's a spiritual issue because this is connected to what is it that I say that is important.
Mm,
Um, and how I live matters as much as what I'm saying, what I believe.
mm,
They should go together, our faith and deeds. So
mm,
I think those for me has been one of the differences. I feel sometimes the impact and the lived experience here is felt
mm.
in different ways in a country like the Philippines.
Yeah. We have ways to insulate ourselves here, and those ways are not as available for people in other places. They're less insulated from consequences. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hmm.
I'm aware that they exist in Canada as well, these
Mm-hmm.
disparities,
Mm-hmm.
but somehow can also remain rather
Yeah.
hidden for the
Yeah.
average Canadian.
It's true. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It seems to me like part of it is the proportion. So Canadians all will hear about forest fires, but what proportion of the population actually experiences the consequence of a forest fire? Whereas in the Philippines, like what proportion of the population experiences the typhoon or whatever else? Like it'd be a high proportion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Well, um, I don't have a good segue for this, but I did want to before we before we wrap up or head towards a close, I know that you were a part of the gatherings with Lausanne for in Korea last September, uh, as well as the you were helping to lead the Global Creation Care Forum that happened just immediately after that. And I know that, and in one of these meetups, we heard from Samuel and another fellow that had visited there. So we got a little bit of a sense of some of what happened. But I know one of the things that has happened in their intervening time was a draft of what's called the Korean Invitation. Um, I think you probably had a hand in that. I don't actually know that for sure, but I'm sure you're well aware of it. So can you tell us a little bit about what this is and what uh, how people can get involved with it, I suppose, how we can support it, but then also like what is the hope behind the drafting of the Korean invitation? We'll definitely include the link in our resource page so people will have access to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the full name of the Korean invitation is the Korean Invitation Good News for All the Earth. So this document is really designed to invite, individuals, churches, communities to come back to a biblical foundation on God's creation, God's
Mm,
purposes for it, and the role of the church in that, and to be able to respond in repentance, prayer, and also action.
mm,
It's not meant to just sort of be a document that's, some people can see and say that's great, but it's called an invitation because there's a desire to see response. So it builds on previous documents that have come out through the Lausanne movement. particularly the Cape Town Commitment that was drafted in 2010 after the South Africa gathering, but also the Jamaica Call to Action, which was more specific to the Creation Care Network. Um, and these documents already do, you know, describe very much, that creation care is a gospel issue, that all these kinds of issues are under the lordship of Christ Jesus. But at the same time, at this stage, it's just, yeah, inviting us to kind of be reminded that we can be joyful in, you know, the purposes that God has for all of creation and to be hopeful as well. But at the same time, to prophetically address, the current crisis, the fact that there is a reality to what's going on, and we do need the church to respond in very tangible ways as well, not just by words.
Mm.
So I personally didn't have my hand in writing it. I was involved in reviewing it, but it was drafted at the Global Creation Care Forum and then by 5 individuals. And then it was brought back to the drawing board for some review. And it was publicly released in December of last year. So at this stage, the opportunity now is, it's available on the website. And we are just trying to get anyone who is willing to engage with that document from anywhere around the world to bring this back to their communities and say, can we, read this document together? Can we explore certain aspects and maybe make commitments as a community to work on them, as a group? I
Mm.
think it's difficult to take these things to see it as one person's response
Mm.
and to feel the burden of it on one
Yeah.
person's shoulders. But when it's done in a community context, yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah.
opportunity there. And that's
Mm.
our hope.
Amen. Yeah, that sounds great. Well, um, anything else that you wanted to say that I haven't given you a chance to say yet? Otherwise, I think maybe we'll wrap up.
Thank you so much for this time. It's been fun reflecting on different themes.
Well, thank you, Jasmine. I I've had it every time we interact, I find it a gift, and I look forward to the next time. And I'm so grateful for you taking time today. It was not you've got a lot on your plate, so thank you for carving out and giving us some of your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Rick. I also have always enjoyed our interactions. So thanks for
Mm.
this space again.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Rosh Canada's Church Earthkeepers Meetups. We have the meetups on this last Tuesday of every month, and we'd love to have you join us next time. To find out more about the meetups or about Arasha, you can check out the show notes or you can click the link for recordings of previous episodes in our archives. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.